Hey Dan Shueftan, it's an honor meeting you here today.
I'd like you to explain and expand on the Israeli-Arab conflict.
We need to look at the Middle East in a very broad sense about the populations, primarily Arabs, in this region. And this is true not about each and every one of them, but if you look at the political collective in this region, you will find a lot of bitterness and frustration. For two reasons. First of all, the self-image of Arabs is people destined for greatness. They remember very well, by the way, like Jews, their ancient history. They remember the rise of Islam. They remember that in the early days, the Arabs dominated a very important part of the world. And it was not only by conquest and by military success, but people wanted to adopt their culture. They wanted to speak Arabic. It was considered the lingua franca for a long period of time. And they believe, and this is one of the few things that Arabs have in common, really, wherever you look at them, this perception that they were destined for greatness. They were selected for greatness. And at the same time, in the last 250 years, they're gradually more and more aware of the fact that they have failed. In many ways, they're the worst failure of modern history, not because people in other parts of the world have suffered less, but because they could have been much more than they are today. They could have used their oil reserves, their economic power that came from oil, their position in the world, the fact that they were historically so important and therefore people were interested in them. The world that succeeded, the West, looked at this region as the origins of the three monotheistic religions, and it is something that gave them some significance. And actually, they have failed in meeting the challenges of the 19th century, the 20th century, let alone the 21st century, and with exceptions. I mean, you look at the United Arab Emirates and you're impressed. You look at individual Arabs, and you're impressed. But if you look at the overall picture, there is a frustration and more than anything else, bitterness of how we, destined to lead the world, find ourselves at the very bottom. And not only do we know that we have failed, but people don't respect us. They may fear us, they may take pity on us, they may support us, many feelings, but respect is not one of them. The idea, here comes an Arab, look at their contribution to civilization, look to what they've done recently, look to what they've done with their own people, how they've succeeded and so on. It's practically non-existent. I mean, again, marginally here and there, but not in a mainstream. And this frustration and bitterness translates into radicalism. Because when you believe you need to have everything and you have nothing, you don't start working very slowly until you get something, okay? If you are homeless but you believe that you should be a billionaire, you don't take another job, you rob a bank, okay? Because you assume that you deserve it, you don't have the patience to work for it, and by the way, other people did. Look at the Chinese. They used to be dominant. They used to be important in their part of the world. And they have fallen from grace. They have become much weaker than they have been. And they've been in a terrible situation. And what they're saying to themselves in recent decades is, we'll work very hard for 50 years, for a century, and we will be a power again. And they're working at it, and they're having success, and they're being respected, and even people who don't like them, who don't love them, nevertheless respect them. The Arabs are not willing to wait. They're not willing to work hard. They want instant responses. By the way, you have it with individuals, you have it with groups of people. It explains a lot. In society, there are parts of the society where people will resort to violence on a very large scale because that's their only way to get the respect by others, because they fear them and therefore they hope to get respect from the people who fear them. And in this region, if you come with a radical message, you have a very good chance of getting public support on a very major scale. You have, of course, to prove that you can make good on your promises. You say if you do A, B, and C, then you will achieve greatness, and then if you start succeeding in a major way, people will follow you and they're willing to make enormous sacrifices. This is what leadership is about in general, but here when you speak about radical leadership, we've seen it very clearly in the last 250 years, but let me take the most outstanding figure. In the 1950s, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, who managed in a very short time, in the mid-50s, not only to capture the imagination of Arab political public, but to create an Arab political public. Remember, this was the time where the transistor radio became available, and the radio, instead of being a piece of furniture that you can only have if you're rich and you have electricity, it became a very small box that you can carry with you everywhere. And through the radio coming from Egypt, called Sawt al-Arab, the voice of the Arabs, he spoke to Arabs, let me use his terminology, from the ocean to the Gulf, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf, from Morocco to Iraq, and he created a political public that did not exist before, of people who were illiterate, but nevertheless listened to the radio and were impressed by what they heard on the radio. You take it with the small elites that could also read and write, and they also had other means of communication. And the message he sent to them was, I found a way to bring Arab greatness again. And what he did was a very sophisticated use of the Cold War in his time, because he pursued an anti-American, pro-Soviet policy that the Soviets supported because it helped their objectives, and the Americans supported because they were stupid. So he got support from both sides by pursuing a policy that pretended to be neutral, pretended to be non-aligned, but was non-aligned on the Soviet side and on the anti-American side and on the anti-British and anti-French side. So it felt like revenge on the Brits and the French, who controlled large parts of the Middle East. And it felt good because it gave them hope, as they believed at the time, that they could liberate Palestine, namely destroy the state of Israel and impose the Arabs on the Jews here. And for a while it worked very well for him, because getting support on both sides, he managed to play a major role not only in regional politics, but even beyond the Middle East, in a way that gave Arab respect of the kind they have never enjoyed before. Now, this radicalism of Gamal Abdel Nasser had in it the seeds of its destruction, because it was not based on any kind of major nation building. It was based primarily on make-believe. It was based primarily on poses. He tried to adopt some of what he believed made the Soviet Union successful, and adopting some of the failing structures that even in the Soviet Union didn't work very well, but certainly in a completely different culture in the Arab world did not work at all. And the result was an accumulation in the early 60s of the realization that it doesn't work. But The more it didn't work inside, the more he tried to use his radical policies to strengthen his position, again using the same mechanism of the Cold War. And again, American presidents who didn't know what they were doing. Eisenhower in his first term in office, he was somewhat different in the second. Kennedy, who didn't understand what he was doing in the Middle East and only undermined anything that could have helped America establish itself by supporting Nasser and believing he can appease him and he can get him on the American side. And in the mid-1960s, when the United States came up with a completely different policy under Johnson, Nasser understood that his game is not working very well, but again, he was already completely captured. He was already completely given to this is what he knew how to do. This was the modus operandi that worked for him. He became addicted to his own radicalism, understanding that it could lead to a major mistake, like making war with Israel before he was ready for a war. He nevertheless was drawn into a war by a mechanism that he himself produced. It's a very interesting paradox. Nasser did not want war in the 1960s. He knew he's not ready for it, but the political mechanism he established was used by more radical elements than him, namely the Syrians at the time and others, to start a structure that inevitably brought him against his will to the 1967 war. And in the 1967 war, the Israeli approach was, let us use the outcome of the war in order to do away with this all-Arab radicalism. Namely, let us offer the Egyptians and the Syrians all the territories that they lost in the 1967 war in return for peace. Now let me translate this term. Peace is not a place where people love each other. What Israel wanted from Egypt is to abdicate its position as the Arab leader of the struggle against Israel. You can be the Arab leader in anything you want, and Egypt is the natural leader of the Arab world. But we cannot accept, and we will not let you have the Sinai Peninsula back, if you continue to lead all the Arabs in war against Israel. So the Israeli concept after the 1967 war, let's make a deal of 67 for 48. We will give you back what we've taken away from you in 67 in return for you legitimizing, accepting, at least acquiescing with what we achieved in 1948. You will not continue the struggle against us, and you have to abdicate your leadership of the Arab world of the struggle against Israel. Again, be a leader as much as you want, but not in leading all the Arabs against Israel. On the eve of the 1967 war, Nasser succeeded in what is the Israeli ultimate nightmare, namely mobilizing all the resources of the Arab world, the human resources, the financial resources, the oil product, the willingness to fight of all the Arabs in the region against Israel and against the moderate Arab leaderships who did not want to go to war with Israel, who were afraid of Nasser, but had to join him because they were afraid of him. In other words, the radical dictated to the moderates a radical policy that the moderates didn't want, the moderates realizing that if they don't pursue the radical leadership, their own people will hang them on a lamppost. So take King Hussein in 1967. He wants peace with Israel more than anything else because he knows the existence of Jordan depends on a strong Israel. We defended Egypt again, we defended Jordan again and again against its radical enemies by saying, if they take over Jordan, we will take over Jordan. Okay? So we facilitated the continued existence of Jordan by threatening the radical Arab enemies of Jordan not to take over Jordan. So he wanted peaceful relations with Israel. And nevertheless, because the appeal of the radicals was so strong, his own people would have hanged him had he not joined the war against Israel. We asked King Hussein in June 1967, we approached him and we said, if you stop bombarding Jerusalem, we will not touch the West Bank. And he knew that he's about to lose the West Bank. But by the time we approached him, his army was already under the command of an Egyptian general who took his orders directly from Gamal Abdel Nasser in Cairo. The king could not tell his army not to go to war, because had he told, the army would not have listened to him. And had the army listened, his own people would hang him. So he must go to war, knowing that he will lose it, but also knowing that if he doesn't go to war, the existence of Jordan will be terminated and he himself will no longer be alive. So the radicals dictated practically everything in the region. You see, when you have the kind of world that you believe should have been, and the kind of world that actually is, and you can't bridge the two, it automatically leads you to radicalism, because you can't change something so fundamental by being evolutionary. You need to be revolutionary. And by the way, this is how Gamal Abdel Nasser and other leaders in the Arab world describe themselves. We are revolutionaries. We will change the rules of the game. We will not do better by playing by the rules. We will change the rules of the game. And this radicalism led to the Six-Day War, led to the defeat, led to the humiliation, but the humiliation of making peace with Israel was worse than any kind of humiliation. So, two more wars, the War of Attrition, 1969-70, and the Yom Kippur War, or the Ramadan War, 1973, pursued in an attempt by the Arabs to say, we will impose our will on Israel and will bring about the destruction of Israel. This is what they believed in public opinion, even when the military leadership knew that it is militarily impossible. The idea is we will make war, and the great powers, in order to stop the war and get our favors, will impose on Israel a retreat that will finally bring about an Arab victory, because Israel will be so weakened that the Arabs will be strong enough to defeat Israel. And this lasted for a very long time, from Nasser coming to power in the early 50s through 1956 and the American imposition on Israel and on Britain and France in favor of Nasser, to the Six-Day War, the War of Attrition, the Yom Kippur War. And it is only in the mid-1970s that the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, realized that not only can he not fight the United States, this he understood at a very early stage when he came to power in 1970-71, but also what he realized in 1977, that even Egypt, with its many millions of people and its thousands of years of history and the potential of the whole Arab world behind Egypt and the oil and what have you, all of this cannot meet the ability of Israel to defend itself against any combination of Arab forces, not only on the battlefield, but also in the political battlefield. In other words, not only do you succeed in the beginning of a war, but finally you win a few battles, but you lose the war. This is what happened in 1973 to the Egyptians. But also when you bring in your pressure on the superpowers, your ability to use Soviet involvement to attempt manipulating the United States. All of this together and all the Arab resources cannot break Israel. And Israel would either continue to occupy most of the Sinai Peninsula, or if you want the Sinai Peninsula, you have to give Israel a separate peace. And the operative term is not peace, but separate. In other words, whatever happens to the rest of the Arab world, Egypt doesn't move. And this is very difficult because it basically says we cannot be the leaders of the Arab world, because if we can't lead the Arabs towards the one thing that they want more than anything else, we cannot be the leaders of the Arabs, and the Arabs don't have any other leader. There is no other country that can function as a leader of all the Arabs. Now, others tried. Saddam Hussein with very limited success. Gaddafi, it was more of a joke than a real option. And Egypt was broken in the sense that it realized it cannot continue to lead the Arabs under Egyptian leadership by mobilizing all the resources of the Arab world vis-a-vis Israel. So the first stage of Israel establishing itself in the Middle East was 1979, when it was clear that by far the most dangerous enemy of Israel, by far the most potentially successful leader of the Arab world, abdicated its leadership of the struggle against Israel. And since then, Israel is doing in the Middle East whatever it sees fit, including stupid things like occupying an Arab capital city, Beirut, in 1982, including essential things like destroying Saddam Hussein's nuclear project, destroying Assad's nuclear project, destroying the Palestinian war of terror called the Second Intifada in the beginning of the 2000s, and including the destruction of Gaza in the present war. And whatever Israel does in the region, Egypt does not fight Israel. It is not involved in a confrontation with Israel. It may say nasty things about Israel, but Israel is used to having nasty things said about her in the Arab world, in Europe, in the United States, throughout the world. It doesn't really matter very much. Would have been nicer without it, but it doesn't really matter very much. But more or less at the same time, when we lose Egypt as the leader of the struggle against Israel, we're getting Iran as the leader of the struggle against Israel. In 1979, we're signing the peace treaty with the Egyptians. Iran is overtaken by the revolution of Khomeini. For a while, we enjoy the Iran-Iraq war. At the time, I remember wishing it would last forever. It's the best possible thing when your enemies kill each other and weaken each other. But unfortunately, after 8 years, it ended. And the Iranians started bringing together the remnants of the radicals in the Arab world, namely Hamas in Gaza, the radical elements in the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Assad regime, of course, before the civil war, a very strong element, after the civil war, very weakened, but nevertheless hostile to Israel and allowing Iran to operate from Syrian territory and through Syrian territory, and the militias in the pro-Iranian militias in Syria and in Iraq. And all these remnants of the radical movement in the Arab world were the ring of fire that Iran built around Israel. So, Israel had a border with Iran, but Iran did not have a border with Israel. So the Iranians could attrition Israel, threaten Israel, deter Israel by building very strong forces, particularly Hezbollah, on the borders of Israel with an immediate access to Israeli centers of population. So it's not something that you fight on the borders. When you have 150,000 projectiles, missiles, accurate missiles, long-range missiles, rockets, whatever you have, and you can really saturate the Israeli anti-missile defense system. Israel has the best, by far, anti-missile defense system throughout the world. But even it can be saturated. You cannot have 150,000 anti-missile missiles. It's beyond the capacity of any army, every economy. So the idea was, we will fight Israel constantly so that Israel is deterred and pressured and attritioned. And at the same time, we in Iran will build a nuclear option and a strong army and ballistic missiles so that we can confront Israel one day after its ability is depleted by the ring of fire built against it. So it is no longer primarily Arab radicalism, but it is Muslim regional radicalism led by Iran, composed by proxies who are Arabs, with the exception of Hamas, also Shiite Arabs, and they are actually working as proxies for Iran, defending Iran from being hit by Israel. And Iran is also defended by being 2,000 kilometers away, but it has its practical forces that they can use on the borders of Israel. And in a way, Sinwar in Gaza saved Israel from this structure by prematurely and unilaterally starting the war on October 7th. First of all, unilaterally, it would have been much more difficult if Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Palestinian elements in the West Bank, and Iran directly from Iran with its ballistic missiles would have attacked Israel. It would have been very difficult for Israel. We were lucky that he started it alone. So, we had a war in Gaza, about a year of a war of attrition in South Lebanon. When we achieved a lot of our objectives in Gaza, we could take the center of gravity of the Israeli armed forces into Lebanon, invade Lebanon, destroy the arsenal that Hezbollah had in Beirut, kill Nasrallah, and really neutralize most of the ring of fire that Iran built against us. Is it still here? Yes. Did it lose 70-80% of its potential? Yes. And then the Syrian regime fell. The road to Tehran was opened because Hezbollah was destroyed to a very large extent. Syria isn't standing in a way. The Iraqis understood that they don't want to suffer what Israel can do in Iraq if they do anything about it. So Israel can turn to Iran. And Iran was stupid enough 3 times to give Israel the best possible excuse for doing what Israel needed to do. First of all, it attacked Israel in April. You have an Iranian general who's coordinating the war against Israel. When we kill him, the Iranians stupidly respond with hundreds of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and drones and whatever they had to throw against us with very minimal casualties. Then, when we kill Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, they respond again. And in these two cases, in October, it was the second, they exposed the fact that all their arsenal is causing Israel marginal damage, not negligible, but marginal damage. So they exposed the fact that there is very little they can do directly against us, and what they could do indirectly against us, Israel has already destroyed to a very large extent. And then they make the third mistake, and instead of negotiating with the United States based on their depleted bargaining position, they refuse to negotiate. They make conditions to America. They will not speak to the Americans directly, only through Oman, and they will not give up enrichment and what have you, and thereby give Israel the best possible opportunity by neutralizing the American constraints over Israel to do what very few people assumed can be done. Look, only the United States has a strategic air force, namely that could stay over very far away places and stay in the air, not come to visit, but stay. And we managed for 12 days to act as if Israel had a strategic air force. In the unbelievable distance of 2,000 kilometers from Israel, because everything along the way was open, because we destroyed everything there that was hostile to Israel. And the important question is not how much did we destroy from the Iranian nuclear project or ballistic project. We really brought down Iran from the position of a first-class regional power to a position of a third-class regional power, because we exposed two things. The limitations, the very, very harsh limitations on its military ability. With all their thousands of ballistic missiles, they can do very little damage that is strategically significant. And second, we exposed their supreme vulnerability, by the way, without hitting what is the most vulnerable, namely the Iranian economy. Because it is a failing economy, it is based primarily, almost exclusively on oil, it can easily be destroyed. We could have easily destroyed it, we decided not to do it at this time, but we exposed the fact that Tehran is at the mercy of the Israeli Air Force. This is dramatic, very, very, very dramatic, much more important than the question how much have we destroyed of the nuclear project. The Iranians will try to renew the nuclear project, this is absolutely certain. The Iranians will try to renew their ballistic capabilities, absolutely certain. But if you have the United States on your side, if the United States used its Air Force for the first time to have a combined war with Israel, I mean, working with Israel in a war against the Muslim state in the Middle East. This is very, 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 very dramatic. Okay? And when you have a president in the United States who believes in using force, who understands the use of force, who understands that you can't talk to people unless you frighten them and humiliate them. Don't try to get their goodwill. Okay? I mean, you can pretend to try to get their goodwill, but they will not give you their goodwill, because unless they're frightened, you can't talk to them. And even when they are frightened, they're jihadists. In other words, they very often act in something that Western people called irrational. It's very rational, according to their rationale. But you must understand they have a very different rationale. So, in 1979, we neutralized, not forever perhaps, I don't know, but for 50 years is an enormous success already, the majority of the Arab world. And now Israel neutralized the radical part, not completely, but we have depleted their capabilities on a major way, okay? Which gives us a window of opportunity where you can try to use it politically. Will it eliminate the problems? No. Will it solve the problems? No. You must be completely stupid and ignorant in order to speak about a solution. When people speak about the two-state solution, they don't know what they're talking about. I'm absolutely stupid. There is nobody on the Palestinian side with any leadership capabilities who is willing to accept an idea that the Palestinians acquiesce with a Jewish state in the Middle East. They manipulate statements that only dumb people will take seriously. And in Israel, today, everybody knows it. Let me put it this way. The very few Israelis that until recently thought that it's a possible way to end the conflict have committed electoral suicide. They're no longer even represented in the Knesset, okay? There is today a very good understanding that Palestinians are enemies. Some of them more active, like in the Gaza Strip, or in the refugee camps, or in Jenin, in Tulkarem, and so on, and some of them militarily less active and only enemies in other fields where they can hurt Israel as much as they possibly can. And the idea is also that this is something that the overwhelming majority of Israelis understand, that the only thing Palestinians want independence for is to hit Israel, to bring in radical forces into these territories. So no sane Israeli, or let me put it this way, no government in Israel that is practically possible will today accept it. So if you want to engage in some occupational therapy, you can speak about a two-state solution. By the way, I propose this to the United States to have a democratic state and a republican state. They don't speak to each other anyway, so they can have a two-state solution. But here, there is no solution because you have barbarians. You have barbarians in Gaza. You have barbarians in Lebanon. But in Lebanon, you also have those who are not barbarians. You have a Lebanese government that for the first time wants to and can try to re-establish Lebanese sovereignty. And then Israel can work with such a government, can work with such an army, and Israel can establish in Lebanon something that Israelis can live with, can make it possible for Israelis to come back to their kibbutzim and to the towns that they had to evacuate as a result of the war, because you may have on the other side, for the first time there is a chance, that on the other side there will be a sovereign Lebanese government that wants to avoid war with Israel. So in Lebanon, we may be heading towards a workable state of affairs. Fine. As much as they can deliver, Israel will be delighted to leave Lebanon. If in Syria, and we don't know, and what happened in recent days is not good news, but if in Syria we will have a regime that doesn't want to fight Israel, great. Then you can speak with them even if they don't control all of Syria. You can reach arrangements along the border. It's not a solution, but it's a workable state of affairs that can eventually develop into something better, or not. But at least there's a chance. I don't see a chance in Gaza because the Muslim Brothers, the problem in Gaza is not Hamas. It is the Muslim Brotherhood. It is the society. There is something profoundly wrong with people who are proud to say, and not just Hamas, this is the society in Gaza, who are proud to say, we will win because we love death and Israel will lose because they love life. Okay? So I don't see a way to find a solution in Gaza. You can fantasize if you want. You can speak words that means nothing, like you bring in a responsible Palestinian government that will take charge. The kind of government we have, the kind of corrupt government, we have in the West Bank cannot even secure the fight against terrorism in the West Bank itself, where it threatens the government more than it threatens Israel. They're totally impotent and unwilling, and there is something again wrong with the Palestinian society that educates their children that the only role model is somebody who killed many Jews. So I don't see any solution there. But the point is not the simple-minded distinction between bad guys who make war or a solution that produces peace, everlasting love and brotherhood. Okay? The real choice in the Middle East is between things that are disgusting and things that are catastrophic. And if you want to avoid the catastrophic, you do things that don't feel very good and don't look very good and are not very good, but are much better than the realistic alternative of catastrophe. So, from an Israeli point of view, the position of Israel has strengthened dramatically. If you look at it in a perspective of 100 years, Israel is today stronger than ever before, offers his people a better life than ever before, and Israelis are aware today of what was always true, but not all Israelis were always aware of, that we live in a region that if somebody is not afraid of you, you should be afraid of them. Now, are there exceptions? Yes, the UAE offers an interesting exception. But our problem is not with the UAE, okay? We can cooperate with them. It's great to cooperate with them. We can reach understanding with them. We can have a partnership with them. Yes, but we still have radical elements that are dramatically weakened, but will rebuild their force because the only thing they have in their life is killing Jews. They're not trying to give their children a better future. They're not trying to build their nation. A better future for them is to kill more Jews. And there is something sick about the political structure of this society today. Can it change one day? Yes. We've seen cultural revolutions. We've seen in Turkey 100 years ago a positive cultural revolution. We've seen in Turkey 20-something years ago a negative cultural revolution. Things could change. But don't pretend that they have changed if they didn't, and don't pretend that they must change for the better. Very often they change for the worse. Okay? In the Middle East, the most important change we've seen in the last 100 years was Islamic radicalism. In other words, a change for the worse. So you must hope for the best and be prepared for the worst. And I think that we're better prepared today than we were before.
Thank you, Dan. That was very interesting. I'd like to ask you, why do the Arabs hate Israel or Jews so much?
First of all, because they believe that like Africa must be black, the Middle East must be Arab. Anything that is not Arab is illegitimate. By the way, including Kurds. They have a problem with Druze, with Yazidis, with what have you. Second, because most Arabs are the worst failure you can imagine, and Israel is one of the greatest successes you can imagine. So if in the midst of failure you have this enormous success, you can imagine what kind of emotions it brings to people who are bitter, resentful, and frustrated. And again, there are other Arabs, certainly on an individual level, but here and there also collectively. But you're asking me about the mainstream. You're asking me about what is happening primarily on the borders of Israel. Look, even the countries who have a well-functioning peace with Israel, namely Egypt and Jordan, public opinion is very radical, particularly in Jordan, where it is Palestinians and Muslim brothers. What else would you expect from them? Okay? So, by the way, Israeli Arabs, their leaders that they have elected say Gaza will win. And we all know what they mean. And they say it because their population knows what they mean. And you don't have an Arab party in Israel that doesn't say these things. This is what the moderates say. Okay? You can't change another culture. You can hope that one day they will change, and as long as they don't, you're prepared for the fact that this is what they are.
Mm-hmm. You said that the Arabs need respect, but after the last war, Israel pretty much disgraced the Arab world.
I'll tell you what kind of respect they expect. I call it the respect of cockroaches. In other words, you did not manage to root us out, and they will remain in the Gaza Strip. This kind of culture will remain in the Gaza Strip, and they're proud of this. Okay, they have nothing else to be proud about. And being proud of that means that the next generation of their children will suffer. But this is their choice.
But you said that the Arab world needs respect, and that's why they're
radical.
Radical, exactly. So now that Israel has disgraced them even more than they were before, is that going to change?
Look, there is always the tension between how much you need to do something and how much it will cost you if you try. Okay? So, is the motivation of people in the Gaza Strip to kill us now greater than before? I don't know if it can be greater than 100%. It was 100%, and now it is 100% turbo. Okay. It's not a real difference. I mean, the uncivilized, barbaric attack on the 7th of October of Gaza, of the Gazan population, forget about Hamas, the riffraff that came to rape, the kind of people who cheered in Gaza, who spit and beat the hostages. These are barbarians, okay, by every yardstick. And some people say, oh, you can't call them barbarians because they have pigments. And people with pigments can't be barbarians, and if you call them that, you're a racist. So if you're stupid enough to even listen to this argument, then you have a problem. But I think we can disregard it.
I understand. Thank you, Dan. That was very interesting, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.